An alien child's blood-curdling screeches pierced the dark veil of space as a human medic fought to save its life amid the scattered debris of a brutal ambush. Combat medic Dylan Johnson, 32, raced through the blaring alarms and flickering lights of the UNSS Valiant. The United Nations Space Command frigate was on patrol at the fringes of Vorta territory when the advanced insectoid aliens launched a surprise attack. After a decade of Cold War tensions, plasma blasts had finally breached the ship's hull. "All hands, battle stations, this is not a drill," Commander Mikhail Petrov barked over comms. The ship lurched hard to port as another volley slammed its armor. Dylan's mag boots clanged on the deck grating as he reached the medical bay. He hurled open cabinets, frantically packing trauma kits and triage gear. Wounded crew members flooded in, many clutching horrific plasma burns. "Hull breach on decks 4, 7, and 12, an officer yelled. "Boarders inbound, security to forward airlock." The entire frigate shook violently. Dylan grabbed a bulkhead as the artificial gravity failed. Blood droplets and debris floated eerily around him. "This is the captain," Commander Petrov announced gravely. "All hands, abandon ship. I repeat, all hands." The transmission went dead in a burst of static. Dylan knew escape pods were their only chance now. He grabbed his medkits and kicked off, sailing through the air towards the emergency hangar, but a strange signal in his neural comm stopped him cold. It was an alien distress beacon, and it was coming from the attacking Vorta ship. Despite the UNSS Valiant exploding behind him, Dylan couldn't ignore the alien distress beacon pinging insistently in his neural comm. His fingers flexed on the shuttle controls as he warred with himself. The Vorta were the enemy. Cold, ruthless insectoids that had just ambushed his ship and slaughtered his crewmates. Protocol was clear. He should jump to FTL and rendezvous with the fleet. But that desperate signal? Something about it pulled at him, overriding a decade of military training and ingrained animosity. "Damn it!" Dylan growled, wrenching the control stick to the left. His shuttle arced towards the crippled Vorta warship, maneuvering through the expanding field of debris that had once been the Valiant. The sleek alien vessel loomed before him, trailing atmosphere from jagged rents in its hull. It listed drunkenly, its engines flickering. Dylan swallowed hard as he guided his shuttle into the warship's docking bay, the comparative size of the crafts making him feel like a gnat landing on a Doberman. The shuttle touched down with a teeth-rattling thud, throwing Dylan against his harness. His armored gauntlet slapped the canopy release and he slid out, pulse rifles snapping to his shoulder. The bay was cavernous and dark, lit only by stuttering emergency lights. Thick smoke hung in the air, acrid and cloying even through his helmet filters. Dylan activated his thermal imaging as he moved cautiously towards the inner airlock. Garish heat signatures sprawled on the deck around him, Vorta corpses, their exoskeletons still warm. He picked his way through them, servos whirring in his power armor as his eyes flicked between his HUD's motion tracker and the infrared ghosts shifting in his visor. A pulsing waypoint on his display guided him through twisting, debris-strewn corridors, deeper into the bowels of the dying warship. The distress beacon grew stronger with each step, an almost tangible tug in his mind. After several tense minutes, he arrived at a heavily fortified hatch. The metal dented and buckled inward from what looked like a massive explosion. The beacon was coming from the other side, and now his audio sensors picked up a faint sound underlying the groaning of tortured metal and the hiss of leaking atmo. A child crying. "No way," Dylan breathed. He slung his rifle and dug armored fingers into the edges of the crumpled door. Hydraulics in his suit whined as he put his back into it, every muscle straining. The metal shrieked in protest, but slowly, tortuously peeled back. Dylan squeezed through the gap and found himself in a cramped space, a macabre parody of a medical bay. Smashed equipment littered the floor, intermixed with more Vorta bodies. And there, on a table in the center of the room, a child, a Vorta boy, no more than 8 cycles old. His small body was charred, covered in horrific plasma burns that wept clear fluid. One compound eye had burst, green blood oozing down his face. His remaining eye fixed on Dylan, the segmented pupil pulsing with pure, primal terror. "No, easy," Dylan said softly, raising his hands. "I'm here to help." He had no idea if the boy could understand him. Slowly, telegraphing his movements, he set his rifle on a counter and approached the table. The child made a weak, chirping sound and tried to scramble away, but his burned limbs couldn't obey. He collapsed, shaking, mandibles clicking pitifully. Dylan's heart wrenched. He activated his suit's medical suite and began to scan, the results cascading across his HUD in a grim tide of red. The boy was dying. His vital signs were crashing, trauma and shock sending him into systemic failure. Without immediate intervention, he wouldn't last another 10 minutes. Dylan pulled a hypospray from his belt and dialed in a broad-spectrum coagulant and antibacterial, then carefully pressed it against the boy's neck. There was a hiss as the drugs entered his bloodstream. "It's okay," Dylan murmured, reaching for his cautery tools. "I've got you." The child stared at him, chest heaving with shallow breaths. Then slowly he extended a trembling three-fingered hand towards Dylan's faceplate. Dylan caught that small hand in his and squeezed it gently. "I'm here," he promised. "I won't let you die." As he worked feverishly to debride and seal the awful wounds, a strange object caught Dylan's eye. Some kind of device fused to the plates on the boy's thorax. He'd never seen anything like it. Curiosity prickled at the back of his mind, but he pushed it aside. Keeping the kid alive was all that mattered right now. Dylan was applying the last sealant patch when his motion tracker blinked red. Movement, closing fast. His head snapped up as he heard clawed feet hammering on the decks outside. Vorta soldiers, no doubt following the same beacon he had, coming to reclaim their own. Or kill the human trespasser. Shit. Dylan gathered the boy into his arms, cradling him close to his chest plate. The child chirped weakly, head lolling against the warm metal. Pulse rifle in one hand and injured alien in the other, Dylan spun to face the door. The medical bay doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Dylan's rifle snapped up as 3 hulking Vorta soldiers stormed in, plasma rifles spitting deadly bolts of energy. He lunged sideways, slamming his fist against a glowing button on his suit's gauntlet. An iridescent bubble shimmered into existence around him, and the child just as the plasma slammed home. The shield flared, absorbing the blasts in a dazzling display of pyrotechnics. Dylan rolled, tucking the boy beneath him as he took cover behind an overturned metal table. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead, slagging the wall behind him. He popped up, pulse rifle barking. The weapon bucked against his shoulder as hypersonic slugs ripped through the air. 2 Vorta crumpled, their elongated heads exploding in showers of chitin and ichor. The remaining soldier chittered angrily, mandibles clacking. It darted behind a bank of shattered equipment, laying down suppressing fire. Dylan ducked back as shots pounded his rapidly weakening shield. His HUD flashed warnings, suit power levels dwindling. Beneath him, the Vorta child began to stir. His remaining compound eye flickered open, pupil contracting in terror, a thin, reedy wail built in his throat, rising quickly to a piercing shriek. Dylan winced as the sound lanced into his helmet's audio receptors. "Hey, easy." He tried to soothe the panicking boy, but his words fell on deaf ears. The child thrashed and writhed, his insectoid limbs battering against Dylan's armor. More plasma blasts sizzled overhead, the Vorta soldier trying to flush them from cover. Dylan's mind raced, desperately trying to figure out a way to calm the kid. His eyes fell on a small medkit attached to his belt. A tranquilizer. He fumbled with the catch, fingers clumsy in his armored gauntlets. The child's cries were becoming deafening, threatening to rupture his eardrums even through the helmet. Just as he managed to pop the medkit open, a new sound reached him over the din of battle. A high-pitched rising whine like a kettle coming to boil. His head snapped around, eyes widening as he saw a pulsing orb sailing through the air towards them. A plasma grenade! Shit! Dylan snatched the grenade out of the air with lightning reflexes. His arm blurred as he hurled it back towards the Vorta soldier, muscles enhanced by his power armor. The grenade detonated in a blinding flash, vaporizing the soldier and sending white-hot shrapnel scything through the room. Dylan curled himself around the child, shielding the small body with his own as debris pinged off his armor. He felt a sudden, searing pain in his left shoulder. A jagged shard of metal had punched through his suit's ceramic plating like it was tissue paper, burying itself deep in his flesh. Warnings cascaded across his HUD, his suit's biometrics redlining. The pain was incredible, like a white-hot poker being driven into his body. But he pushed it aside, his focus entirely on the child in his arms. The boy had gone limp, his single eye dull and glassy. For a terrifying moment Dylan thought he was dead. But then he saw the shallow rise and fall of the small chest, the weak flutter of a pulse in the burned neck. Alive, but for how long? Dylan staggered to his feet, cradling the child close. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored it, letting his suit's automated med systems flood his body with painkillers and stims. He had to get the kid out of here. He half ran, half stumbled back through the ship's corridors, retracing his steps to the docking bay. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made everything seem hyper-real, colors too bright and sounds too loud. His bootsteps rang like gunshots on the metal decking. As he reached his shuttle, Dylan's motion tracker lit up with a new contact. A Vorta dropship closing fast on the crippled warship, reinforcements, no doubt drawn by the same distress beacon that had brought him here. "Damn it, no time," he growled. He slapped the shuttle's hatch controls and leaped inside, strapping the unconscious child into the co-pilot's seat. His fingers danced over the helm console, firing the thrusters and engaging the stealth systems in one smooth motion. The small craft lifted off, gliding out of the docking bay like a ghost. Dylan angled the nose towards open space, away from the approaching dropship. He needed to put as much distance between them as possible. "Valiant, this is Combat Medic Dylan Johnson," he said, opening a secure comm channel. "I have a critical patient on board, Vorta child, severe plasma burns, requesting immediate medevac and extraction." Static crackled across the line, a tense heartbeat of silence. Then a familiar voice, tight with strain and surprise. "Johnson? What the hell are you doing on a Vorta ship? Where's your squad?" Dylan swallowed hard, tasting blood and ash. "The Valiant. She's gone, sir, ambushed by the Vorta. I'm the only one who made it out." Another pause, heavy with shock and grief. "Understood," the voice said at last, rough with emotion. "Make for the rendezvous point, best possible speed. We'll have a trauma team standing by." "Copy that." Dylan closed the channel and glanced over at the boy, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. The strange device fused to his exoskeleton glinted in the dim light, alien and inscrutable. What secrets did it hold? What had he just stumbled into? Dylan didn't know. But as he pushed the throttle to the firewall, the stars blurring into streaks of light outside the canopy, he knew one thing for certain. His mission had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Dylan's fingers flew over the shuttle's control console, plotting a course towards the Valiant's last known coordinates. The small craft shuddered as it accelerated, its engines straining against the damage inflicted by the Vorta ambush. In the co-pilot's seat, Zephyr stirred, his remaining compound eye blinking slowly. Dylan glanced over, his suit's translation software already working to decipher the child's chirps and clicks. "Easy there, kid," he said gently. "You're safe now. I'm taking you somewhere we can get you fixed up." Zephyr's mandibles twitched, his translated voice thin and reedy in Dylan's helmet speakers. Where am I? Who are you?" "My name's Dylan. I'm a medic with the United Nations Space Command. I found you on that warship badly hurt. Do you remember what happened?" The child's eye unfocused, his body trembling. There was an attack. Alarms. Fire everywhere. I was so scared." Dylan nodded, keeping his voice calm and soothing. "I know, kid, but you're okay now. Can you tell me your name?" "Zephyr. My name is Zephyr." "Zephyr, that's a good name. Strong. Dylan paused, choosing his next words carefully. Zephyr, I need to ask you something important. What were you doing on that ship? Where were your parents? Zephyr's head drooped, his voice barely a whisper. My father, he is a general in the Vorta fleet. He brought me on the ship for training, to learn how to fight. His small frame shook with a sob. But I don't want to fight. I don't want to hurt anyone. Dylan's heart clenched. This child, this innocent, caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't understand. Hey, it's okay, he murmured, reaching out to place a comforting hand on Zephyr's shoulder. You don't have to fight anyone. Not anymore. Suddenly a shrill alarm blared through the cockpit. Dylan's head snapped to his sensor display, his eyes widening at what he saw. A massive energy signature right on top of them, cloaked. Shit! He wrenched the control yoke hard to port, sending the shuttle into a spiraling dive just as a barrage of plasma torpedoes ripped through the space where they'd been. The shuttle rocked violently as the near miss slammed into its shields. Warning lights flashed red across the console, damage reports scrolling across Dylan's HUD, engines critical, life support failing, shield generator offline. They were sitting ducks. Dylan's mind raced, running through 100 scenarios in a split second. They couldn't outrun the Vorta dropship, couldn't hide with their cloak down, couldn't fight, not with a child on board. But maybe, just maybe, they could even the odds. Zephyr, strap in tight, Dylan barked, his fingers already flying over the console. I'm diverting all power to weapons. The shuttle groaned as energy rerouted from engines and life support, the already dim lights flickering. But on the tactical display, the weapons capacitor surged to full charge. Dylan grinned fiercely beneath his helmet. Time to show these bugs what a human could do. The Vorta dropship loomed before them, a predatory shadow against the stars. It oriented on the shuttle, energy spikes flaring along its spinal cannons as it prepared to finish them off. But Dylan was faster. His thumb stabbed down on the firing stud, sending a volley of missiles screaming from the shuttle's launch tubes. The projectiles slammed into the dropship's engine ports, the shaped charges penetrating deep before detonating in rippling blasts of fire and plasma. The dropship lurched, its cloak flickering as power surged through damaged systems. For a single shining moment, its underbelly was exposed, unshielded. Vulnerable. Dylan snarled, the rage of the Valiant's lost crew burning in his blood, and pulled the trigger on the shuttle's main gun. A lance of blinding light erupted from the shuttle's prow, a high-intensity laser boring into the dropship's guts like an auger. Explosions marched across the Vorta craft's hull, secondary detonations chaining through its innards. And then, in a silent flash of light, the dropship simply disintegrated. Shattered hull plates and molten globules of metal spun lazily through the void, the only remains of the once deadly warship. In the sudden stillness of the cockpit, Dylan could hear Zephyr's rapid, shallow breathing. He turned to the child, seeing his own reflected face in that wide, terrified eye. It's okay, he said softly, reaching out to clasp Zephyr's trembling hand in his own armored gauntlet. It's over. You're safe now. But even as he said the words, Dylan knew they weren't true. Warnings still flashed across his console, the shuttle's systems redlining one by one. They were crippled, alone, running out of air and power. They needed help, needed it fast. Dylan turned back to the console, fingers moving with desperate speed as he coded a distress beacon. Set it to transmit on all UNSC frequencies. He could only pray that the Valiant was still out there, still able to hear their call. He looked back at Zephyr, forcing a reassuring smile he didn't feel. Help is coming, he promised, his voice rough. We just have to hold on a little longer. The child said nothing, but his fingers tightened around Dylan's, a silent plea. In that moment, looking into that battered, terrified face, Dylan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just another mission anymore. Another faceless Xeno to save or kill as duty demanded. This was a child, a life placed in his hands by the capricious tides of war, and he would die before he let any more harm come to him. Hours dragged by as Dylan and Zephyr huddled in the crippled shuttle, the life support system sputtering and failing around them. The power drained steadily, plunging the small craft into frigid darkness. Dylan pulled the shivering Vorta child close, wrapping his arms around him in a futile attempt to conserve heat. "Just hold on," he murmured, his breath misting in the air. "They'll come for us, they have to." But as the minutes stretched into hours, Dylan's hope began to wane. The Valiant should have received their distress call by now. Where were they? Had they been destroyed in the ambush, leaving Dylan and Zephyr to die alone in the void? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a blinding light flooded the cockpit. Dylan squinted through the cracked canopy, his heart leaping into his throat. There, looming above them like a titanic guardian, was the Valiant. The frigate's hull filled the viewport, its running lights glinting like stars against the blackness of space. A deep, resonant hum filled the shuttle as the Valiant locked on with its tractor beam. The small craft shuddered, then began to move, drawn inexorably towards the frigate's hangar bay. Dylan sagged back in his seat, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "We made it, kid," he said hoarsely, giving Zephyr a gentle shake. "We're going to be okay." The shuttle touched down in the hangar with a jarring thud. Dylan unstrapped himself from his seat, his muscles screaming in protest as he stood. He helped Zephyr to his feet, the child's burned flesh cracking and weeping at the movement. The hatch hissed open, revealing a phalanx of UNSC Marines, their weapons trained on the shuttle. Dylan raised his hands slowly, stepping out onto the deck. Zephyr clung to his side, his single compound eye wide with fear. "Stand down!" a familiar voice barked. Commander Petrov pushed through the ring of Marines, his craggy face a mask of confusion and concern. "Dylan, what the hell happened out there? We thought you were dead." Dylan opened his mouth to reply, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked down at Zephyr, the child's trembling form pressed against him. "Sir, this is Zephyr," he said at last, his voice rough with emotion. "He's the reason I'm still alive." Petrov's eyes narrowed as he took in the young Vorta, his hand tightening on his sidearm. "A bug? You brought one of them onto my ship?" Dylan stepped forward, shielding Zephyr with his body. "He's not a threat, sir. He's just a child who needs our help." For a long moment, Petrov said nothing, his gaze flickering between Dylan and Zephyr. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. "Take the Vorta to the brig," he ordered, his voice hard. "We'll sort this out later." Two Marines stepped forward, their hands rough as they pulled Zephyr away. The child cried out, his fingers scrabbling at Dylan's armor. "No, please," he wailed, his voice high and thin with terror. "Don't let them take me." Dylan lurched forward, but Petrov's hand on his chest stopped him. "That's enough, Johnson," the commander growled. "You've done your job. Now let us do ours." Dylan could only watch, helpless as Zephyr was dragged away, the child's desperate pleas echoing in his ears. The Marines hustled him out of the hangar, their boots ringing on the deck. In the days that followed, Dylan was lauded as a hero by the Valiant's crew. They marveled at his courage, his ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. He was put forward for commendations, for medals of valor. But Dylan felt no pride in his actions, only a gnawing sense of shame and regret. He couldn't stop thinking about Zephyr, alone and afraid in the depths of the ship. The child's terrified face haunted his dreams, his screams jolting him awake in a cold sweat. As the Valiant set course for Earth, Dylan found himself questioning everything he had once believed, the righteousness of their cause, the nobility of their fight. How could they claim to be defenders of humanity when they treated their enemies with such cruelty, when they locked up innocent children and called it justice? He knew he had to do something. He couldn't let Zephyr's fate be decided by men who saw the Vorta as nothing more than vermin to be exterminated. Dylan requested an audience with Commander Petrov and the ship's senior staff. He stood before them in the briefing room, his heart hammering in his chest as he made his case. "Sirs, we cannot continue to fight this war with hatred in our hearts," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "If we do, we are no better than the enemy we claim to despise." He spoke of Zephyr, of the child's bravery and innocence. He argued that by treating the Vorta with compassion, by seeing them as living beings rather than targets, they could begin to break the cycle of violence that had consumed both their races. But his words fell on deaf ears. Petrov and the others dismissed his pleas, their faces hard and unyielding. They spoke of duty, of the necessity of victory at any cost. There could be no mercy for the Vorta, no quarter given. Dylan left the briefing room in a daze, his spirit crushed. He had risked everything to save Zephyr, but in the end, it seemed to have been for nothing. The war would grind on, more lives would be lost, and the hatred between their species would only grow. As he walked back to his quarters, a young ensign intercepted him. The man glanced around furtively, then pressed a scrap of paper into Dylan's hand. "From the prisoner," he whispered, then hurried away. With trembling fingers, Dylan unfolded the note. He recognized Zephyr's spindly handwriting, the words written in a shaky, childish scrawl. "Thank you for saving me," the note read. "I know your people and mine are enemies, but I hope someday we can be friends. I hope someday there will be peace." Dylan read the note again and again, tears blurring the words. He thought of Zephyr, alone in a cold, dark cell, clinging to the faintest ember of hope, the same hope that now kindled in his own heart. He knew the road ahead would be long and hard, that there would be countless battles to come, countless lives lost on both sides, but for the first time he dared to imagine a future beyond the war, a future where humans and Vorta could coexist, where children like Zephyr could grow up without fear. Dylan folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket close to his heart. He didn't know if he would ever see Zephyr again, if he could keep the promise he had made to protect him. But he knew he had to try, for the sake of one small innocent life, for the sake of all the lives yet to come. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.